Welcome back. Today I have got a story for you guys. It's been a while since I've done a story. If I discount DRC episodes and little asides here and there, it's been nearly a year. So first I need to set some context. I'm going to do that by introducing an old friend of mine. His name is Alex. I could make easily a 40-60 minute video just on Alex. I could easily make an entire series just on the stuff that we got up to together when we were teenagers. But for the sake of brevity, I'll just tell you a few points. Being around him back when we were teenagers, you were always guaranteed to have a good time, but on the flip side, you were always almost guaranteed to get into trouble. He was this odd bohemian in our sort of rough school, our rough state school. He came from this upper middle class background and was something of a bored prodigy. Like I said, I could easily get sidetracked and go into detail about Alex, but hopefully I've given you enough to give you an idea of what he's like. The other bit of context is that I never bothered to sort out a passport for myself when I was much younger, but I did receive a crap load of money from two particularly nasty car accidents I had when I was a child. You can go check out my video on car crashes and I'll go into the list through some of the worst ones. And by a crap load of money, we're talking in excess of 11k. I was terrible with it, but I refused to spend more than £500 on a car, which is another bit of context, as you'll see. It's the summer of 2008, and the story starts with me going to visit Alex at his grandparents in Northampton. Honestly, I don't remember too much of what happened on those 3 days, but what I do remember went something like this. Walk around the outskirts of Northampton, including through a busy driving range. Sign up to a casino membership, below about £80 each between £1,400 and £1,500. Drive to Peterborough to meet up with a friend of Alex's, buy a lot of booze. Book an impromptu night at a local travel lodge and pay way over the odds. Trash the hotel room and get about 2 hours of sleep, leave at dawn. Lose Alex's friend and attempt a pub crawl but get bored. Visit Argos and buy a tiny 2-person tent for about £15 to £20. Drive around the countryside until we find a sign for a campsite. Book ourselves into a rustic and picturesque farm/campsite for the night. Lovely farmer husband and wife invite us in for the best meal we've eaten in a few days. Next morning, drive back down to Sussex. So, on our way back from this weekend of debauchery, Alex and I get to talking and we decide, well, we had a bit of fun with that camping trip, we should do this again sometime pretty soon, maybe over the summer, but extend it. Besides, we had a tent now, so we could camp pretty much anywhere and it didn't require a passport because I didn't have one. Alex wanted a road trip. I wanted to go on a ferry. This is how we ended up booking a trip to the Isles of Scilly. You know what? Just assume the line, more money than sense, applies to the rest of this story from here on, and you'll understand a bit more of our mindset. The return ferry from Penzance at the tip of Cornwall to St Mary's somehow cost me close to £300, and this is where our unhinged vacation begins. So, first thing to know about me, I'm never late for hotels, flights, ferries, anything of the sort. So the first thing I did was go collect Alex 2 days in advance, with the tent, the ferry ticket, and a giant plastic storage tub that is well worth remembering. I had sunk already over £300 into this trip before we even took it. The least I was going to get Alex to do was come with me to Lidl for snacks and supplies. Alex's contribution so far had been 2 disposable Kodak cameras. It's worth mentioning at this point, Alex had had previously a pretty glamorous lifestyle, both in the Middle East. He lived in Germany for a few years, and then he fell from grace and ended up in a London crack den at one point. And I had a whole range of lifestyles in between. But for some reason, Lidl was a step too far for him. Anyway, as shocked as he was, our haul was even more shocking. We literally walked out of Lidl that day with a huge trolley filled to the brim with just 3 things: bottles of water, maize snacks, and apples. The next morning after that, I'm up at 7 o'clock in the morning doing all the checks on my Vauxhall Combo van, including debating whether or not to top up the oil. I decided not to in the end, but if you've seen my car crashes video, this car/van featured in that video, and you might know where this is going next. Basically, we leave around about 9 o'clock, and by 11, we're just getting onto the M27. And my phone is buzzing like crazy. I pull my phone out of my pocket and I quickly glance at it, and I see that I've got about 20 missed calls from my dad. I chuck the phone over to Alex and say, can you ring him back? It doesn't even have to be on loudspeaker for me to hear him screaming down the phone that I've left the oil cap off and it's on the wall in front of our house. I used to swear by the Vauxhall combo van with a 1.7 Isuzu engine, because that crap managed to drive for 2 hours with oil covering the whole engine. Not to mention it was also very reliable and cheap to run. Anyway, we pull over onto the hard shoulder and we give the AA a call, because clearly I've got a problem. Seriously no, this mechanic arrives and he can't do enough for us. And what I mean by that is he gets us in his van and drives us all the way around the nearby city of Southampton, looking in every car parts shop, every mechanic, for the matching oil cap, because it's a particular shape apparently. We never ended up finding an oil cap, but like something out of a really corny anime or kids show, he sees our determination and he teaches us an important life lesson that day. Duct tape fixes everything.
Hey, when in doubt, duck it.
He's just like, I'm sorry guys, I can't find you a lid, but I can maybe make one. And he just slaps on a load of duct tape and makes a perfectly formed lid. He tells me that on the return trip, before I drive home from Penzance, that I need to locate another oil cap if I'm not in any hurry. Honestly no, I ended up driving around with that oil cap of duct tape for about another 2 months. For anyone else, this may have put the pressure on, but I was smug because we had left 36 hours early for our ferry. We stop off on a campsite somewhere in Dorset and make the rest of the journey early the next morning. There is only one ferry that goes between Penzance at the tip of Cornwall and the main town of St Mary's in the Isles of Scilly. If you're feeling really fancy, you might be able to get a helicopter to the nearby island of Tresco. But at some point, one does have to ask, what is there for two 19-year-olds in these tiny Cornish islands? And the answer to that is sweet fuck all. Cue Danny the Pirate. We get off the boat and we're carrying this giant purple tub, sort of this big, that's filled with our tent, our sleeping gear, all our clothes, a little haul that is not little enough for Alex's liking, a couple of Kodak cameras and a magnetic chess set. And we haven't planned anything at all, by the way. So we head for tourist information, because that would make sense, right? There's a guy working in there, he's got long black hair, not much older than us, covered in piercings and tattoos, a little bit of a goatee. We gravitate straight over towards him, of course we do. At this point, he tells us that we've just missed this big party that happens once a month or so, and that he likes to bury kegs of rum in the sand on the beach, like a pirate, one of us says. And he goes, yeah, that's right. We find out that he's known locally as Danny the Pirate, and we ask him where the nearest campsite is. Great, it's behind a pub. We climb this hill that is straight out of Peppa Pig, book in, pitch our tent, and sit down at this table, because this is a fabled pub, as in it has table service. We then spend the next 3 or so hours getting into the Cornish spirit, well, cider actually. In particular, we discover something called Cornish Rattler, which hadn't rolled out to the rest of the country yet, but it is now. Now Cornish Rattler goes down like juice, and you can drink it fast. You can drink a lot of it very quickly and not feel any effect at all, until you go to stand up. We may have ended up crawling towards our tent that night. The next day, we get up, reasonably late for us, about 10 o'clock, and we decide to explore this island in the laziest and lamest way possible. We catch a bus. I have no idea why this bus number is 664. There's only one bus that goes around the island, but maybe it's to signify that these islands are just 2 layers above hell. The Isles of Scilly are really miniature, and St Mary's is the only island large enough to warrant privately owned vehicles and public roads. That said, this bus circumnavigates the entire island in just 17 minutes. Our game plan was to look out the window for anything cool or interesting and then just ring the bell and get off. But all that happened is that we got off 2 stops before where we started from to go to a different pub than the one we started in the night before, at midday. The only other remarkable thing about that entire bus trip was that a dog ran out in the road at some point and the bus had to stop. Anyway, we go to the second pub of the whole trip, and who's behind the bar? That's right, it's Danny the Pirate. He suggests that we visit Tresco next. It's the second pub of the trip, so it's only fitting that we get stuck into our second cider of the trip. Meanwhile, we're playing pool for about 4 or 5 hours. Like I said, we arrived at midday. The only thing is, I was rather distracted from playing pool that day by this creepy artwork accompanied by a poem that was going around all of the walls in the room. To this day, Rime of the Ancient Mariner is one of my favourite poems, and for some reason, I didn't even know about the Iron Maiden song of the same name. After a while, Alex has had enough of me staring at this creepy artwork and the poem, and we end up leaving, going back to the first pub, and back to the Cornish Rattler. The next morning, we decide we've had enough, we're going to go try a different island. A quick point about visiting the Isles of Scilly. The main form of public transport, even for school kids, is essentially a small collection of trawler boats. Supposedly, Tresco is internationally renowned for its Royal Abbey Gardens. Yeah, the gardens are there, and yeah, they're full of these really interesting, if colourful, slightly phallic looking plants. And you can explore the whole island on a golf cart, which is kind of cool. Personally though, I recommend the Valhalla Shipwreck Museum. And if memory serves me, I think Danny the Pirate may have been working there too. I can't really remember, my head was a bit foggy and I ended up just staring at these figureheads, of which there were about 50 of them. Just really focused in on the craftsmanship because I'm too hungover to go anywhere too fast. I was so focused that at some point Alex had walked off and then came back really aggravated, saying that I'd lost him. There's not too much to really say about Tresco, other than that. But to two awkward drunk teenagers, the signs of snobbishness were starting to show. After that, we headed back to our favourite table, back on St Mary's, for a third night of Cornish Rattler. There were two things which attracted me to St Agnes, and I actually don't know her. One was that allegedly they made the best ice cream among the islands, and I was obsessed with Cornish ice cream, almost as much as I was obsessed with Cornish Rattler. The second was the island of Goo, which until very recently I was pronouncing as Hugh. Goo is one of several islands in the Isles of Scilly that you can only reach when the tide is low by walking from another island. And it has a grand total population of 3. Now, here's something that's worth mentioning about the Isles of Scilly before you even think about going out there. It's something that most of us don't even think about on a day-to-day basis, and that is the tide. During our first conversation with Danny the Pirate, he pointed us to this humorous looking poster on the wall of the Information Bureau, Tourist Information, that basically showed how if you were walking along a beach that had a cliff at the back, you could be completely cut off and end up stranded on that beach. This is extra true for crossing Tomboli on the islands. Just so you know what I'm saying, this is a tombolo. Anyway, St Agnes has an ice cream shop that is right next door to the campsite, and you could walk to an island that had one house on it. We arrived on our first morning there, awkwardly carrying the giant plastic storage tub between us. After hauling it all the way to the campsite, we realised this was way too heavy, and we downed a couple of litres of water each before making our way to Goo. But when we got to the beach, we could just see this island in the distance with a tiny house on it and a huge amount of sea between us, and we realised that tide's not going anywhere soon, so quite habitually we headed to the pub again for another night of cider. The next morning I discovered that the tide was going to be out completely, and that we'd be able to walk to the island late that afternoon. So Alex suggested we use the campsite's laundrette to catch up on some laundry. This turned out to be a huge mistake. Alex had moved out a couple of years earlier at this point, and he lived by himself, so I assumed that he would know how to use a washing machine. I certainly didn't, and I left him to it. What happened next was he massively overfilled the washing machine, put way too much detergent in it, and the result of Alex's incompetence was that Alex blew the washing machine up and flooded the place completely. But if you know washing machines, they don't open when they break down, so we couldn't just leave. We had to put our tail between our legs and go tell the campsite owners we broke your washing machine, and they had to get a mechanic to come out and drain the washing machine so that we could get our clothes back. And then we had to dry the clothes because there was no way we were going to be able to carry them, sodden as they were. Alex was indignant, stating, "Oh, you really should have put instructions on the wall if you're going to have a washing machine open to the public." I didn't know anything about washing machines, but I was completely mortified. I was in a hurry to go, and we ended up leaving with half our clothes semi-damp and a very soapy texture and smell. Bear in mind, I was still determined to walk to Goo. So, much earlier than we expected, we pack up all our stuff, get into the giant purple storage tub, haul it all the way across this tiny island, go over to this other island, stare at St. Agnes for about 5 minutes, and then head our way to the dock. That's it for the first half of this story. The story ended up being quite long, so I've split it into 2 halves. Come back next week to find out how I nearly got killed by the Atlantic Ocean and some rocks twice, and how me and Alex found ourselves banned from an island. In the meantime, please check out my video here about car crashes, and my video here about how I discovered I have retinitis pigmentosa. It'll give you some greater context for some of the events in this story. Otherwise, see you next time.